I'm really excited to hear what Hector has to share with us today. And yeah, Hector, come drop some knowledge on us. Take it away.
I'm here. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, as Maria mentioned, my name's Hector Jaime. I'm a staff product designer, but that's cool that people might think I'm a principal. Maybe it's in the cards. And I'm here to talk about speculative design as applied to design systems. So I'm going to share my screen. And I think everyone can see this. Yeah. Sorry, I can't go full screen because then I can't see my speaker notes in Google Slides. Yeah, so the title of my talk is Design System Fictions. As I mentioned, I'm Hector Jaime, Hector in English, Hector in Spanish, Heitor in Portuguese, and Hectaras in Greek. And Jaime is Jaime. You just pronounce it that way everywhere. And yeah, I'm a designer on Gestalt Pinterest design system. And so what's new on Gestalt? Well, we've been thinking about getting away from docs on the web because people just spend too much time inside at their desks on their screens. And instead bringing them into the real world. We created a little prototype with our design technologist, Dave. There's a little compass now instead of a website that you use, and you have to go to these different museums and art galleries anywhere you are in the world. And once you find them, you can go in and then you see, everything you need for your design, for your product from our design system, right? Whether it's interactive kiosks to check out code or these big, beautiful displays of all our design artifacts. Truly feel that this is a better way for people to navigate our system and learn how to use it than the flat old doc site. Pretty sure that you've figured it out by now that this is all bullshit. But it is one example of speculative design. So what is speculative design? I'm paraphrasing here from Cheryl Kababa. She's got a really great book I recommend to everybody called Closing the Loop, Systems Thinking for Designers. And she's also referencing thinking from Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby and speculative everything. Speculative design reframes the role of design in order to provoke, ask questions, and imagine the way things could be. We do this in order to create a better future. But it's also important to understand that sometimes when we're doing this, things can go wrong. So it unearths the good and the bad as we think about going into the future. And it's a topic I picked because we talked about pushing boundaries. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and push my own boundaries and talk about something that's very new to me. So, so this is the definition of speculative design. It changes design, right, from the usual thing that we're very good at and do, which is solving problems. And instead, it uses design to ask questions. So instead of asking, how might we replace it with what if? And oftentimes when people think about like futuristic design, speculative design, they might think about these things like this city that was prototyped by Oceanics. It's called Busan. It's planned for somewhere in South Korea, and it's a city that floats on the ocean, right? And it's always a very beautiful, technical, amazing science fiction almost look of the future. And it's what in speculative design, some people might call a design fiction, right? But again, this is still in that how might we aspect of actually trying to create something that solves a problem. More often though, speculative design is about, sorry, this isn't advancing. There we go. Is more about asking questions again, right? What people call discursive design, critical design. If you look at today, this year's winners from Core 77, they're actually not really real products, and they're not even really that technical. One of the winners is a series of books that people created called data stories. They took data from various homes that they use Alexa and turn them into short works of fiction. So it's less about, hey, what do we do with data and create a product, and more about like, what are we doing with all this data and all this surveillance and making more of a commentary on that. And so the question comes up, especially for us who work on design systems, is why bother, right? There's plenty to deal with, as everyone has talked about earlier today, and in the present, right? But there's a few things that kind of keep me up at night. Not really. My dog keeps me up at night. My teenager getting home at 2 a.m, it keeps me up at night. But anyway, just ask yourself that. As far as design systems, what do you think about currently? Two things that I read a while back about. One of them is design systems' inability to anticipate the future, right? This is coming from designer Tony Olson, who wrote an article about a year ago. So the problem with any system is that it can only account for what is known, never the unknown. And sometimes what this happens is that we tend to fall behind, right? Because we can only decide to build something when people need it right now, but it's right now. It's already kind of too late in certain cases. And this statement really just talks about how things currently are versus how things could be. So we want to know about how things could be. The second thing, and something that I think I'm going to attribute to Erica Hull, but now I can't find the quote, so I don't want to misquote her, but it's something that I read, and this is a very curious quote, right? The problem is that most design systems practitioners are not systems thinkers. And it's kind of interesting because I think we all do consider ourselves to be the systems thinkers in product orgs, but really systems thinking is a much bigger thing, right? It actually isn't just about thinking about a little small system. It's about a big picture, and it's actually a methodology that's used beyond design and was started by non-designers, business people, people in healthcare, people in public policy and so forth. Big, wicked problems, right? And so all this stuff, as someone who works on something very specific like a design system, is very hard to think about, right? As I mentioned before, here's our backlog, bunch of stuff to take care of that we need to handle now. So I don't really want to think about a few years down the road. But maybe if we do that, we lessen our backlogs. Another problem is that, we talk about systems thinking as far as design systems, but design systems is a specific type of systems thinking methodology. Again, Cheryl in her book calls it a hard systems methodology. It solves a very specific problem that we are very familiar with, right? It solves for efficiency. So just to look at the different types of systems thinking, you can kind of break it up into two types. There's soft systems and hard systems. Soft tends to talk about social improvements. It gathers qualitative data. It's iterative, and instead of coming up with prescriptive problems, it's more that just kind of things emerge and ideas emerge from that. Versus hard systems, which is a design system theoretically, it's very specific. It's about technical improvements or physical improvements. Quantitative data. The old, how many people are using components or not? How can we measure the things to build? It's reductionist. It reduces something to something very specific, like a efficiency, and it's prescriptive, right? Very clear solutions. I will say, and it's kind of mentioned in the book, I'll get to that too, that the two aren't mutually exclusive. Everyone's talking today about the social aspects of design systems, very important, more over on the soft side of things. So I think these two go hand in hand. And as what Nicole Sarsfield in an interview specifically on design systems mentions with Cheryl, it's finding that the balance between thinking historically and optimizing for efficiency, and then giving room to explore beyond those confines, beyond those boundaries, right? It's something that you want to make something that can respond to change, that is flexible, and apply to many use cases, right? So you start kind of seeing things expand. I'm not just thinking about our own product that I work on at Pinterest, but how does that even fit in the bigger ecosystem around it? And finally, it can feel kind of weird to just go off and talk about things that don't directly relate to design systems and the work we do every day. But Isn't that how all of this started, right? I mean, when we think about the big sort of books on design systems, right, it is actually a lot of it was borrowed from architecture and urban planning book called A Pattern Language, nothing to do with UI. And even, the one that we all love to reference, Brad Frost, Atomic Design, right? He's talking about atomic physics here. So we can take things from other places. Even, we all spend a lot of time naming our systems on things that come from somewhere else, right? Gestalt comes from psychology and so forth. So I think that we can go beyond and borrow from other disciplines. Future thinking, which is where speculative design comes from, service design, industrial design, and so on. So now let's get into the thing here, speculative design systems, and it's some experiment I'm trying out to see if you can actually apply speculative design to design systems, and coming up with a few provocations, and then I'm actually some fictions which are more prescriptive and solutions. So first, with what I like to call provocations. These, again, are about not really solving problems, but asking questions. I'll start with an analogy. I don't know if people are familiar with the toaster project. A designer basically decided to take an everyday toaster that he found at a mass-produced, cheap, a department store, and decided, I'm going to build this toaster from scratch. And you can see what happened over on the right. He built it, but it melted very easily, right? It turns out there's a lot of things about a toaster, though. It's very simple. It's very hard and complex. You try to smelt iron. It turns out a single human can not smelt iron anymore. And so it broke, but the point wasn't to build a usable product. It was to sort of get people to understand how these very simple things that we use every day actually are super complex, require a bunch of people and a lot of things and a lot of parts to make happen, right? So I thought, okay, how can I do something like that in relation to a design system, like a speculative project? So the prompt here is to try to build a professional audio recording interface using only what's available in your design system Figma library. In this case, I used Gestalt and just our Figma library. I always say that our system is a lot more flexible, but and then I tried to basically create this audio interface, like say Logic. I actually used Logic Pro from Apple and see if I could recreate it. And all the parts are there, everything's there for the most part, but it doesn't really look like something an audio engineer would use. Start running into issues. I don't have all the icons, so I have to rely on button labels. It starts bringing up some questions, right? Well, maybe actually, if you do something like this, potentially people who aren't engineers can understand these interfaces. But what happens to the audience itself, right? So starts coming up with questions. What's missing in your design system? You design a system, but are you the one who's using it, or other people are using it? Have you tried using your design system to build a product? What happens, right? And if you can build something like this, maybe things like this can be at least thought of, right? Companies grow, things change, companies can go from just worried about a product, and then all of a sudden you've got an ad platform to deal with, internal tools to deal with, and all that kind of stuff. And how would you anticipate these sort of things, right? And then I tried something like, well, maybe if I go to dark mode, that'll look more like a recording interface. And kind of there, right? But then, what if not everything's available in dark mode? So then the next thing I tried is something that I actually grabbed from a toolkit that's available for free. I've got some resources I'll share later. This was a presentation that was done at Figma Config by a couple of designers at Twitch, Kalyani Tukari and Shihan Zhang. And that's just different workshops to start thinking speculatively, right? One of this, and I tried this out via Slack with some of my teammates at Pinterest, Gestalt, is to come up with a metaphor, and then what if our product is a metaphor, and then what if, how might we, and then you insert a verb. But I changed out how might we with what if, and so I came up with all these different. Well, some of my teammates come up with some of these. What if Gestalt is a car? Imagine Gestalt is a car. What if people drove it? Back to the compass metaphor. I really like this one. What if it's a compass? how, if people use it to navigate their process, a Lego game to build a spaceship, an art exhibit, people don't go, an 80s arcade game, and so on and so forth. And you can kind of take this stuff and think of it on your own. So then actually try to build some of these things in mock-ups, right? So what if it's a video game, and what would happen? What if people started just blasting all your components? What if this is a way that we, instead of setting up surveys, we interact with our product teams? Like, here, play this game, and then we can truly find out what you really think, right? What if it became a cartoon character, and say someone's over there trying to do something, and they try to detach a component, and then the thing just flies away, and you're completely blocked, and you get a warning that you have to actually pay some kind of a fee or punishment in order to get your Figma privileges back, right? So you start thinking about these. This isn't really a product, but it gives you some thoughts, like, is detaching really that harsh, like really that bad of an offense? Perhaps there's other ways we can direct our energies. So those are just sort of like these more ways to think, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Then we get into a fiction, right? So this is something we're actually going to try to solve a problem, and again, using this kit. Well, we start out with this thing called a futures cone, and so it's one way to be more prescriptive towards the future. It's a framework first introduced by Trevor Hancock and Clement Behold in 1994. It's used for foresight strategy, which is a bigger part of speculative thinking. It's used by a lot of different people to think further ahead into the future, besides just like the next quarter or the next year. Long-term versus short-term thinking. And the future, as you look at it from today out into the future, things get bigger and bigger and more ambiguous, right? Which is another part of systems thinking, is dealing with ambiguity. So the big circle there is the possible, right? Anything can happen. An earthquake, an alien invasion, a lot of stuff can happen, right? And then it starts getting narrow. You start thinking about the plausible things that are more feasible and logical given the circumstances, right? It's plausible that we'll have a design system created by AI, and then the probable is what is most likely to occur, right? And so, but what you really want to think about here when solving is what is preferable. And this is what we actually want to happen, but not do it in isolation. Think about the big picture. So going back to Twitch's toolkit, there's so many different ways to do this, but one of them is a futures wheel. And it was developed in the 2000s by Jeremy C. Glenn. And you basically imagine a future scenario, say a few years from now. You put it in the center there, and then you start coming up with direct consequences, whether they're positive or negative, and then indirect consequences, and start seeing how they're all together. And then from that, you can come up with a solution that you think will mitigate all these risks and get to that preferable future that you want. So I'm actually going to take, the first thing that had gotten me thinking about the future design systems was Zero Heights conference on the future. And Brad Frost had a great talk, and he proposed this idea of a global design system, which is something OpenUI, I guess, is also looking at. It really resonated with me because I'd been thinking about it previously in the week or whatever. I was working on a component, and as I go to all the different design systems, there's like, wait, like we're all saying the same thing. It's the same component. There's like 500 different design systems with the same component. So it's kind of, as Brad mentioned, it's a little ironic that we're supposed to be the efficiency people, and yet this feels kind of inefficient. So, but again, this is out in the future, and if you were to actually take this idea and put it in the futures wheel, some things start emerging that maybe it's not, maybe it's a great idea, maybe not, right? And so you have all the usual good things that come out of this, right? One single source of truth, finally, improved efficiency. We all can all really work together on one thing instead of just sort of here and there. Accessibility improvements, but other problems, right? And again, there's the things that can happen in your org, and looking outside of things, right? AI, energy intensive, potential bad for the environment, right? And these are the things that we don't tend to think about as design systems designers and practitioners. So from this futures wheel, then I thought, okay, there's a few things that we can think about for design systems. One is going back to that compass thing. I'm kind of obsessed with it, right? If large language models are so intensive, perhaps then a local, when you use the design system yourself, it can be much more lightweight and energy efficient. And then you can use it inside your own integrated tool. Perhaps, you know, now that we've got this one big system, we can work on things for ourselves that don't have the constraints of Figma. We can really create something custom for ourselves using all of this, since we're no longer doing the day-to-day design system stuff. And then maybe further down the road, the system can be regenerative in the sense that it's regenerative AI, meaning it can correct itself and respond to change. So these kind of things that we get into where we can't respond to product teams go away. And the fourth thing is just then we start kind of thinking about these. I got this from an API modeler I used to work on, and maybe something like this already exists, where you can have these model components that once the real component is ready, things can get swapped out. Then after you do all this, you do this thing called backcasting. And so backcasting is the opposite of forecasting, and something you might do when you're working on a short-term vision product for the next quarter or whatever, where you start from today and kind of go step by step in the future. With backcasting, you actually start from that preferable future you want and start going backwards. And all the things that need to happen or you think need to happen. And again, since this is more soft systems, it's not necessarily prescriptive, things start to emerge, right? So for example, if you want to have a regenerative global design system, you know, right before it actually happens, a bunch of people actually adopt it, right? And then you have to come up with what the global standards are. This kind of stuff, I feel like I'm not being too daring right now. This stuff looks very familiar, but that's kind of reassuring about the future, right? You also, things start emerging, right? Okay, what components can we finally let go of? Can we just get rid of carousels finally? Like no, they're not going into the design system. Then you see, you have to kind of stress test things, make sure, that whatever you're doing with AI isn't just wrecking the environment, making things worse. You're also basically train it on what we consider to be the best design systems. And then, right before you started this, you get to the good old UI audit. So it kind of gives you a framework to kind of proceed and start thinking about all the things that can be positive and can go wrong. And maybe at that point, you need to change your premise and think of a different solution. So I'll leave everybody with that. One thing to think about, and why I kind of think about all these things is another quote from a systems thinker, right? That yesterday's solutions are today's problems. So think about things that are in your current design system that seemed like a great solution yesterday, and everyone signed off and yes, awesome, and now they've become a problem. And so if you try to forecast things, push the boundaries a bit, maybe you can kind of mitigate this so that solutions don't become problems later on the line. Well, thanks a lot. Here are some references. Closing the Loop, Speculative Everything. This article, it's got kind of a clickbaity title. The best design system is no design system. Leading Like a Futurist, that's a great LinkedIn Learning course. And then the Figma Toolkit from Twitch. And yep, once again, I'm Hector. I'm a designer over at Pinterest Gestalt. Our system's open source. If you visit it, you can know pretty much everything that we're up to. And we also have a blog over a Pinterest.design that we sometimes contribute to, but the rest of Pinterest design, including research, content design, et cetera, also contributes. And I'm not sure if I've got any time left over, but if I do, I'm happy to try to answer questions. Thanks.